and for joining in, and hope you all had a good, sumptuous lunch. Thank you to the Lloyd Institute for organizing this amazing event, and thank you to Vanda ma'am, Chitra ma'am, and everyone who's been involved in organizing this event, and personally inviting me for this, for this session and for this conference. You know, um, I would like to thank everyone, for your presence as well, because just after lunch, it's a tough session to follow, because you all had lunch, that's the sugar high that you'll get, as part of the session, you'll probably feel a little bit, weird. I'm not a pharmacologist like many here. So sugar levels might rise or fall, causing you to a little bit. So let's kind of gear up first. Okay, let me just do a quick, this will serve as a sound test and will serve as a brief, hopefully waking up call for everyone. Let's do a quick sound check with the music. Next, please. All right. So it's a quick 30-second, kind of gives you the theme of what I'm going to talk about as well. It's a topic on commercialization of technology and research. All right, next please. So this is the topic. I'm going to talk about catalyzing interdisciplinary based and outcome based commercialization of research and innovation. Now, before I dive into the topic, I want to understand the audience a little bit. So, let me understand, if you can raise your hand, who here is from university administration or has an administrative role in a university, like, either as a, managing some center, a career center or something like that, or managing a lab. Anyone? I know there are some people in the front row there are. Okay, few. Okay, who here is a faculty member or does any sort of teaching? All right, quite a few. Okay, and who are students? All right, a lot of you. Okay, excellent. That's good to know because I want to make sure that I'm speaking to the right audience, and it seems like a little bit about the faculty and the students. The session actually I tried to cover for all three: faculty, students, as well as the the administrators. But I'm going to talk about just a little bit about commercialization. What does that mean? And how is it important for you? And more importantly, I'll bring in some perspective from commercialization strategies coming from Canada, from US, and so the top institutes from US. We'll talk about them a little bit. And then I will kind of get into a little bit about strategies for US students or faculty members yourselves. So let's kind of go through that. We had a great introduction, so I don't need this. Okay. Next, please. Next. So one of the things, the reason why I'm speaking is I had the privilege of starting the startup programs at two of the largest universities in Canada. So I started the Creative Destruction Lab at University of Toronto's Rockman School of Business, as well as the York University's Innovation York programs. And both were tied with their tech transfer and research commercialization office. And I had an opportunity, a lot of the 400 startups that I worked with, almost I would say half of them or more than half of them came from researchers themselves. Researchers could be faculty members, students, a lot of them even undergrad students, and a lot of them PhD students as well, and everything in between. So that's why I'm kind of I'm sharing some of my experiences with that. Now to start off, we just had lunch. Let's do some story time. Okay, I'm going to take you back to 1997. Next, please. So this is an email written in 1997 by a student in Stanford's master's program in computer science. This student, to give you a bit of a context, he is a student in computer science. He's a master's student. He's doing his MS in computer science. And he has developed a piece of technology which he is looking to partner with and sell to a company called Excite, to an industry. Now, this is 1997, okay, the start of the dot-com boom. And this email is actually part of a communication between the student and the company where he's negotiating the deal. Now, I won't go through the entire email, but just focus on some of the red marked positions here. He starts off by identifying the costs incurred at Stanford. And the costs are 1.3 years. The first thing that he points out is 1.3 years of his labor, valued at $130,000. So he values his time at $100,000 per year. That's his salary. At the peak of dot-com boom, that was the salary that a typical Stanford master's grad would achieve. And that's one of the biggest aspects of the cost, which he roughly calculates to around $500,000. It includes faculty consulting, one programmer, some other fees as well. Next, please. Then he goes on and he continues to identify the benefits that Excite will receive once the technology is acquired by them. And there are some rough calculations, there are some question marks here, but he calculates that to be around $7 million in the first year. So if Excite acquires this piece of technology, they would gain $7 million in the first year. Next. Then he continues on. He says, what are the losses that Excite will have if the technology is acquired by a competitor instead? And he identifies that, and again, there are a bunch of question marks here. He identifies that to be around $2.3 million. Okay, so if Excite acquires, it's worth $7 million to them. If they don't, it's going to get a loss for $2.3 million. Now, if you add both of them, that's around $10 million, overall benefit or loss analysis. Next, please. And then he continues. He continues with a proposal, and the proposal says that, I would work full-time for Excite for a period of 1 year or 7 months so that he can go back to school and continue with his master's. And then he will continue consulting 1 day a week until the implementation, and he wants a bonus. Next, please. Then he goes on and talks about the possible compensation options. Cash, being paid in stock. Third is the preferred option for salaries. Now, as a student who's graduating soon, that's reasonable to understand. Most students, most of you here, would want a salary job after you graduate. And that's what he prefers. So he prefers to give his technology in return for a salary for about $100,000 that he identified earlier. But then there's a fourth option that says acquire a company which owns the technology. And this is some Vinod's thought. Okay? Then he goes on to have a conclusion statement where he says that, I will only agree to this kind of, arrangement or commitment if there's significant compensation behind it, and then at the end, I would like to get this contract done quickly. Please let me know what you think. And that's where he ends. Attached with this, next please, is an agreement. This is the agreement between Stanford, the student, and Excite. Now, this agreement was never signed. And you might be wondering, then why am I discussing that? Because this was an agreement between, next please, Larry Page and Excite. Next please. Larry was actually the founder of Google. And the technology that he was giving up became the basis of what we know today as Google or Alphabet company if you're trading in Alphabet stock. Google is valued at $2 trillion today. Sure, it has been 24 years since that time, but this technology he was selling for $100,000 salary, and he was preferring that option over bringing into a company. Now the Vinod's thought, the comment that you saw about Vinod was actually the legendary investor Vinod Khosla. He's an IIT Delhi graduate, and he is one of the most prolific investors in the Silicon Valley. He was the founder of Sun Microsystems, in around 1980s, he started that company. And he's one of the most influential investors right now. And even at that time, he was a mentor to the startups and faculty members and all the innovators at Stanford. He did not allow Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the founders of Google, to sell this technology. And he said, instead, roll it into a company, start with the operations, start marketing, start building the company and launching it. And then over a period of time, if someone is interested, like Excite, let them buy your technology. Google grew so fast, no one could buy them. And they became the market leader, taking out all the competition. Now, there are a couple of lessons that we learned from here. Okay, next please. So one of the biggest lessons is even the most successful business persons around the world could be naive. Now, Larry Page is one of the most prolific entrepreneurs of our times, and he was making these mistakes at a very early stage. Secondly, it's difficult to value an innovation. The technology that they developed was actually, just became the basis of Google search. There was no search before that. And there was, there was search like Alta Vista and Lycos and Yahoo was still there. But, no one knew how much to put a value to this. Is it worth $100,000? Is it worth $10 million? Is it worth $2 trillion as it was sold? Now that is a challenge. And that is a challenge that everyone faces, including every one of you who has built up a project, developed a technology, or developed a piece of patent or something that you have developed in your research labs or on your computers. How to put a value to that, it's a tough question. Third is, often personal interests drive people to take bad decisions. And we saw this with Larry Page here. He was, as every student does, he wanted a good job, a well-paying job, and he would rather take a job than go through the pains of building a company. That was his personal interest. That was kind of leading him to a bad decision. But then small mistakes in early stages of a company can often kill some amazing companies or amazing innovations. Now, we today are talking about this only because Google has become what it has become. For every one Google, there are probably 20 or 30 or 50 other companies that actually never made it big, and which are probably more so important or more so innovative than Google at the time. Now, that is often the reason because of that is often because there are small mistakes that are often committed at the early stages of a company that kill a company altogether. Finally, proper judgment and guidance from experts during early stages can help you avoid those mistakes. Okay, Vinod Khosla. Not everyone has a Vinod Khosla, or not everyone has people around, but mostly it's because of lack of people looking for them. If you look around, you have some amazing faculty members. Lloyd Institute itself has been created in collaboration with the industry group. There are a lot of industry partnerships that are going on. There are a lot of mentors around. Take advantage of them. Even though you're not actively working on a project, keep the interactions going. Get those guidance. There's no market for guidance. There's no market for judgment. You can buy a management book, you can attend some classes or online courses and such, but you cannot buy judgment. And judgment is a tough thing which is extremely important for any individual. And that is something tough to buy. Okay? Now, next please. Now Stanford, this kind of story was created at Stanford, and Stanford has a pretty deep and prolific history in commercialization, and they've been pioneers in this. Having said that, Stanford is actually not that old of a university. It's old, context matters. Some of the older universities in the US, like Harvard, MIT, are like centuries old. Stanford, not so much. But Stanford is able to achieve something that no one else can. And we were, when designing the programs and the structure for both at University of Toronto and York, we looked at the gamut of different approaches that tech transfer offices and commercialization offices across the world have taken. So we found Stanford's approach to be quite remarkable. Next, please. Broadly speaking, there are, so this is Stanford's history, by the way. It starts off actually in 1970. So the Tech Transfer Office was only created about 50 years back. In fact, last year they celebrated 50 years anniversary. It was started by Niels Reimers, and with a two-person team, two persons dedicated full-time for commercializing all the research developed at the university. Their main thing from day one was to be constantly generating revenues. Their licensing revenues, the fees that they got from licensing, in the previous years, 13 years of doing commercialization, was $5,000. In the first year itself, these guys generated $55,000. So it was like 11 times more. So that kind of led them to a path where they got more resources. Eventually, they had their breakthrough in 1974, where one of the researchers created the PCR technology. Now you might know RT-PCR, okay, the polymerase chain reaction. Again, I'm not a biotechnologist, I just know the full form, but that was developed in 1970s by a professor at Stanford, and it was patented by the Office of Technology Licensing, OTL, at Stanford. And they, by 1980, they initially patented it in 1974. They started patenting it and they started licensing it to other biotech companies in the Bay Area and the Silicon Valley. And by 1980 or 1981, they had 73 companies who had licensed that technology, generating a revenue of about $1.4 million for Stanford in 1981. Just that one piece of technology. In between, there was the Bay-Doyle Act, which I'm not going to go into details because this is an American act that basically provided a structure, and which is something talking about NEP here. I hope the Indian government does that, something like this as well, where they defined who owns property rights when you develop something at a university, even if it's funded by the government. In the Bay-Doyle Act, they said that the inventors, any technology that you generate automatically is owned by the university, because the university's infrastructure and their funding is used for creating of those. Having said that, the inventors get a percentage share, which is negotiated on a case-by-case basis. And that was what the act was, and that was a significant milestone in the commercialization industry. Continuing on, 1980s, you saw the computer boom, Apple being created and such. And then in 1994, they had their significant return. That was the first time that actually they got a return from equity in a company. So until now, all the revenues that the Tech Transfer Office generated was from licensing to industry, not from investing, not from taking ownership in companies or startups started by faculty members or researchers. And that's a mindset that has changed significantly since then. But it's important to know that even Stanford, in this time, Sun Microsystems was created. GPS was invented at Stanford. There's a lot of technology that was generated. Stanford did not own equity in any of those. They owned equity in some of them, but they never gave them enough returns. What gave them returns was actually what gave them returns was actually in 1994 when they had the first time. That was 24 years after they started, their tech transfer. Now, this tells you, as a student or a faculty member, if you're generating, if you're kind of, working on a technology, often students are not too fond of, licensing it to or giving out the technology or, giving exclusive rights to their license or patent to a company. And often there's resistance for that, and that's because, you feel that you're not getting enough returns, you might as well start a company and do that. For Stanford, it took 24 hours to realize any returns on an equity ownership. So imagine, it's very difficult to do that. If you get an offer from a industry to license the technology, it might be a good one to consider. Next, please. Now, that was Stanford, 20, 30 years ago. This is Stanford now. This is from their last year's 2020's report. I mean, I won't go into details, but 575 is the number of technologies that had more than 100,000 in revenues, and 103 technologies generated more than $1 million in revenues. These are just licensing contracts. 11,000 investors, 400 startups, 13,000 cumulative technologies. Next, please. Continuing on, Stanford, again, the number at the bottom, which you might not be able to see, is 2.1 billion, is the total amount of revenues generated by Stanford just by licensing. And that's a massive number. Imagine what's the budget for this university, or for, say, the biggest university in India, I don't know, Delhi University maybe. What's the budget? It's probably 1/10 of this, or at least half of this. It's not $1 billion for sure. They generated that amount of revenues from just licensing. Okay. Now, that's the potential of commercialization. And we talk about national education policy. We talk about, research, quality research. Commercialization should be a big part of it, because that creates future for the university, for the researchers, and for the economy itself. Stanford became one of the primary reasons why Silicon Valley is what it is today. Okay, and one of the biggest reasons was most of the technologies that even Apple started with. Apple took it from Xerox licensed it from Stanford. All of them had a root, at least, of some sort in Stanford. Stanford and NASA, by the way, which is also has a big base in Silicon Valley. But that's one of the biggest reasons. So if you talk about commercialization, if you talk about research, and you do not talk about commercialization, you're only talking about half the story, and you're missing on a big half. Next, please. Now, let's talk about the different approaches to commercialization. Okay. Now, we say that research commercialization is like, everyone talks about, but very few people are doing it. And we have a joke, and I don't know if, we have a joke that it's like sex in high school. Everyone talks about it, no one is doing it. And commercialization is kind of like that for researchers and academicians. It's something that a lot of people talk about, and there are different approaches that have been tried on that. Next, please. These are the top 3 approaches, okay, which have been used. The most common, if you have to bucket them. The first is administrative approach. A lot of organizations around the world are doing this, including India, including Canada, including US, including Europe. This is where most of the commercialization workload is transferred to the university administrators. That's where, you have your people managing the accounts for your grants. They are basically tasked with the task of commercializing the technology, talking to industry. The campus placement officer who's doing placements and connecting with industry, they are loaded with research partnerships as well. Now that is an approach. It has worked in some cases, but not so much. Second is legal and accounting approach. This approach thinks that getting patents is one of the biggest achievements. And if you get a patent, they just report number of patents and that's it. We have, we see this across the world. The number of patents becomes a big thing, and most of these organizations who take the legal approach, what they will do is they will staff their tech transfer office with lawyers who will be good at filing patents and getting patents, and that's what they do. So you have a whole bunch of patents, and you spend a lot of money getting those patents, but you do not make any money out of it. These were the 2 very common approaches across the world until 1970. What Stanford did, and why I refer to them, was they took the third approach, which is where they prioritized marketing of these inventions over everything else. What they did was they hired experts from industry or people who had experience in industry or had some experience in technology and had some business acumen to actually take this research, find the matches in the industry, and then sell to them. Now that approach was kind of a different approach, and Niels Raymer, who started this, came from an industry background, and he brought that with him. And that has now been followed by a lot of organizations around the world, but it has been proven to be extremely successful. Try to market your research now. Okay. Now, if you have any technology, again, we'll refer to this again, but do not wait for the next patent or getting it to be really good. Just try to get it to the market as soon as possible. Marketing is the best approach among all the different commercialization approaches used. Research has showed that. Next, please. Now, if you are an administrator you might be thinking, how do I set up a commercialization office? And for this, I would like to use the case study of University of Toronto. This is where I worked and worked quite diligently with the tech transfer office there. This is where we looked at the history, and this information is not necessarily publicly available. Next, please. At University of Toronto, what we have is we had, if you look at the history, there were 3 different models that we used. And it kind of evolved over time. The first was the patent catalog, okay, which again, a lot of people are doing that. Started in 1980s, kind of became obsolete around 1990s. They started, generating, a lot of patents. They focused on just generating patents and, trying to license them. The focus was solely on licensing, and university dealt with the transactions themselves. The university said, we will be doing all the transactions on behalf of the faculty member and everyone, and university basically owned their technology. This led to many patents, as you can imagine. However, very few of them were revenue generating, and there were almost no startups that were generated at all. The next was the licensing business model. So this is where the default ownership shifted to the inventor. They said, okay, the inventor is now responsible, they own the ownership, and they are responsible for licensing it as well. Again, the university just as a facilitator. Now in this case, they had some success, but soon a lot of focus came upon short-term commercialization projects. Because if the inventor is doing that, they would just do an industry project and that's it and be done with. And no significant long-term gains like the likes of what Stanford generated, or even U of T, which kind of one of the biggest inventions for the insulin. They were the one who, in University of Toronto was where insulin was discovered. None of those successes could be repeated. Then they switched in 2000 to a hybrid model where they adopted a startup incubator model where in 2000 and 2001, they started with the Innovation Foundation, which then translated into an organization called Mars in Toronto, where the default ownership was shared. The responsibility was shared. And, university acted more as a service provider. And the faculty member or the researcher had the liberty whether to go with a licensing partner from the university, find it on their own, create it as a startup. And as soon as that happened, University of Toronto's, research returns went from like almost minimalistic to somewhere close to around, in 2019, it was close to around, around $600, $700 million a year. That was the amount of revenue that they were generating from their licensing fees. And that proved to be quite a bit of success. Next, please. Now, if you were to thinking, okay, as a researcher, as a faculty member, what are some of the key ingredients? How do I make my research more commercializable, and how do I actually make it more available to industry, or how do I get it across to the industry? Next, please. So these are some key ingredients. First, concentrate on and try to hire people to market the innovations. Again, marketing is supreme importance. Okay, I'm a business professor. So, I might have a bias there, but it has been proven, if you don't sell it, no one is going to use it, okay? Even a kid, a 3-year-old kid or a 2-year-old kid had to cry for his mom to realize that, he needs food. So you have to communicate to the world that you need something, or you have something that you want to give, or you want something in return, okay? There's no harm in asking, there's no harm in selling, okay? You need to remove the stigma. There are a lot of people who have stigma around selling. You should need to remove that. The second is, for administrators mainly, give authority to the people who are licensing. From University of Toronto's model, we saw that. As soon as you had the shared model, you had an amazing success, because you transferred the ownership to the people willing to take it. And as soon as you did that, there was some amazing success to that. The third was, try to outsource the low-value tasks like patenting and and accounting. Okay, there are a lot of lawyers, very able lawyers and very good lawyers. Don't try to do it yourselves. Definitely, as an institution, don't try to hire lawyers, because you can hire a lawyer who's good at, say, biotech patenting. Okay, but what if tomorrow electrical engineer develops something in the semiconductor space? What would you do? that lawyer is not so it's better to outsource, hire a team of lawyers and get the work done by them. And finally, align the incentives. And this is the most important thing. Any player, whether it's university, it's the faculty member, the industry partner, or say, the government regulators, you want to make sure everyone has their incentives aligned and everyone gets what they are looking for. Because as soon as there is a conflict of interest, okay, the thing dies. Next, please. So, we talk about, commercialization. We talk about, in the context of the national education policy that is being developed, okay? But why are we talking it right now? Commercialization, Stanford has been doing for 1970s, MIT, they've been doing for a long time. And the reason is because we live in very interesting times. Next, please. I'm going to play a video right now. It's a 4-minute video, okay? We created this video in 2017, so it's almost 4 years old now. But it's far more relevant today than it was before. In fact, I've used it more in the past year. I've used more in the past year than I've used ever. Now, it's a quick video. It's a fast video, so pay attention. Next, please. Can you play the video?
If you're watching this, you're among the 3% of people that understand that the future of work is going to look very different from what it is now. So keep watching. Let's see where we're heading. It's also exciting, right? Siri will recognize your voice even if you're 5 meters away from your phone. That new chatbot feels totally real. Self-driving cars are no longer fiction. You can analyze your DNA. You tried flying that drone for the first time, and you're thinking of buying a smart speaker to make your life so much easier. A few years from now, and that's something like 3 years, not 30, artificial intelligence, robotics, machine learning, mass 3D print, biotechnology, chatbots, virtual reality, deep learning, drones, augmented reality, smart objects will all be deeply enrooted in our everyday lives. Just like computers, phones, or electricity are for us today. Oh well, is this really gonna happen? And if it does, you'll adapt when the time comes, right? Life is good. You love your job. You've been working for this established company for a few years. You're comfortable in your position. You know what you're good at. People like you. And that last presentation you gave got you some amazing reactions. You're safe with your company. In the meantime, you see an article or two speculating on the future of jobs. McKinsey published a report stating that 45% of all current tasks could be automated with present technology. The World Economic Forum estimates that 33% of jobs in 2020 don't even exist yet. But what do they know, right? You've got time. Oh look, the supermarket just introduced self-cashier machine. You're at the airport checking in luggage. What the heck happened to all the real people at the check-in desk? Gone. Replaced by machines. But it's only the low-skilled jobs, right? Nope, think again. In 2012, there were 150,000 humans working on Wall Street. 3 years later, automation has cut that number down to 100,000. That's 1/3 gone. But it's only the mathematical and scientific jobs, right? Nope, think again. This Japanese insurance company, Fukoku Mutual Life Insurance, is already replacing all its human insurance claim workers with an AI system that will handle customers more efficiently. See these articles? They're written by algorithms, and we can't tell the difference with human written content. And thinking of converting yourself to being an online poker player? Too late. There's an AI that can already beat humans at it. Those journalists, tax consultants, marketeers, technicians, knowledge workers, lawyers, even the person editing this video right now will to some extent have been impacted or automated by technology in a couple of years. And what have you been doing? Probably watching Netflix. And the problem is, the machines don't wait. And the machines, they don't watch Netflix. So what are the forces at play here? Basically, there's 10 million developers out there using increasingly simple and cheap technology to build new products and services. Some as young as 12 are already coding the future. Even that safe company you work for is increasingly under outside threat. And it's not just the Google, Amazon, Facebooks, and Apples of the world that I'm talking about. There are now tens of thousands of startups out there eating away at all sorts of jobs. Now, are they creating many jobs in the process? Let's look at some stats. Travel a bunch of years back to when Kodak ruled the world of photography. They were worth $38 billion and employed 140,000 people. That's approximately $270,000 per employee.
Our people work with pride to make Kodak a creative and innovative company.
Fast forward to recent times, YouTube sold for $1.65 billion with a mere 65 employees. That's $25 million per employee. Instagram, which had 13 employees and was sold for $1 billion. That's $77 million per employee. WhatsApp sold for $19 billion with 55 employees. That's a staggering $345 million per employee. So how is this all possible? Technology has allowed the emergence of what we call exponential organizations. These are exponentially fast-growing companies that leverage technology and require less employees but more tech-savvy ones.
You will find that we are technology optimists. We believe that technology is a major driver of change in the world.
And as software continues to eat up the world, more companies are trying to replicate these exponential companies, hire less people but grow exponentially through technology. As this happens, job roles are slowly disappearing and being replaced by skill sets. Employers require you to know an ever-growing number of new and ever-changing fundamental skills in order to use the technologies they've implemented. Master the fundamentals and you can master the rest. A digital skills gap is growing for both mid-skill and high-skill level jobs. Before you know it, you've become irrelevant. But wait, what's this doomsday message? There's actually a way to leverage technology before it leverages you. And in fact, it's never been easier to do so. This might sound kind of corny, but it starts with the right state of mind. It starts with having a growth mindset, where you have the desire and the confidence that you can learn anything. Shift your thinking on how these technologies will rattle and mutate, but enrich your work life. Because yes, if you play your cards right, technology will make your work life and your life in general much, much better. The fact is that technology will actually remove boring, repetitive jobs from your way, but only if you understand the fundamentals. And you have no excuse not to do so. How can you stay relevant if you can't talk the lingo? How can you stay relevant if you can't execute? Can you talk tech? Can you talk APIs? Can you talk code? Can you talk data? While slow educational institutions are struggling to keep up, that's not an excuse. Train yourself, take your education in your own hands, learn to code, learn about behavioral psychology, automation tools, playing with data, user experiences, be curious. And if you're an employer, train your people. Online and offline courses have never been more readily available or rich in content. It's time to build something. Your greatest credential in this new era is your output of stuff. Proof of your awesomeness. A website, a blog, a prototype, a simple data model. It's time to build cool stuff and showcase it. It's time to start learning. It's time to get shit done. It's time for your growth.
Now, this video, or it inspires them. And I really hope it was the latter. It inspired you more than it scared you. Some of the key insights, and I won't go into too much detail because you watched it yourselves, is the world is constantly changing. The value that it talked about the value per employee, $345 million per employee. That's what corporations are looking for from you when they hire you. That's what corporations are looking for when they partner with you as a faculty member. Are you able to generate that value? Okay? And if you want to, how do you? Okay? Identify your gaps, train yourselves constantly. Okay? Next is develop your proof of awesomeness. Now, that is a key concept. We talked about experiential education a little bit earlier. There was a talks around, education institutes providing the experience. That's where your proof of your awesomeness matters. Just having a credential, just knowing certain things is no longer, good enough. Because everyone can get better or can learn, can take a course online, and everyone can do that. What differentiates you in today's world is how you are able to generate the output of your work. Can you showcase that you can deliver? And that's what is important. Okay? Next, please. Now, there's certain cases that are against commercialization and for commercialization. Okay, I won't go into too much details in the interest of time, but broadly speaking, there are some people who would say, okay, I don't want to do commercialization because it either promotes conflict of interest or it puts additional burden, or the classical thinking that, okay, the research is funded by taxpayers, why should industry get advantage of that, or why should someone make money off that? Okay. Now, but against it, next please. Against, there are also a lot more reasons for commercializing research. Okay, one is the financial. Second is increasing, the need for innovations. And if you're not aligned with the industry, that's a challenge. Commercialization is often the only way that an innovation will ever get used. And finally, for your own teaching, commercialization actually helps you in dealing better with the challenges of today, and as a student, it helps you in preparing yourselves better for the challenges of the industry. Next, please. Now, to conclude, I would like to end with a thought experiment, and I want you all to participate, to think about it, okay? Suppose, next please, and it's kind of a commercialization thought experiment, okay? Suppose I give you $10 or say 1,000 rupees, everyone right now. Each one of you, imagine you got 1,000 rupees. Your goal is to make as much money as possible in the next 2 hours. Okay, you have 1,000 rupees, you got 2 hours, you need to make as much money as possible. At the end, you need to give a 3-minute presentation here to the audience about what you achieved. And say the best winner will get, some huge amount. Now what would you do? Next, please. Most people would think about, okay, maybe I just have 2 hours, and just 1,000 rupees, $10, I can't do much with it. Maybe I could, if it's a live market, I'll invest in the stock market. I would buy Bitcoin, and maybe play the volatility. Maybe, there are a lot of academicians here. Maybe I'll sell a course online. Maybe I'll do some marketing online. Maybe, the classical thinking, I'll set up a lemonade stand. I will start selling cookies, or gamble, put it on the roulette table. Right? Most people would think in these lines. Next, please. But the fact is, the winning strategy, the winning teams actually don't use that 1,000 rupees at all. What they feel is that the money is actually a distraction. It's actually something that is worthless in the context. Can you reframe the question? How can you make the most money if you had nothing to start with? Now, what did you have? 1,000 rupees, 2 hours, and a 3-minute presentation slot at the end. The most valuable resource might be that 3-minute time slot. Now, can you, in those 2 hours, call up a whole bunch of, there are a lot of students here, there are a lot of, faculty members here. Can you call up a software company that sells educational tools and say, hey, why don't you sell your startup? Give me 10,000 rupees. You get a 3-minute slot in terms of 600 people, here and online. August audience from some of the top schools, and you get a chance to market your product. It's awkward, it's not perfect, but that's the winning strategy. Okay? Most winners, would think it that way. Next, please. Now that is actually the difference between strategy and tactics. Think about policy and implementation. Okay? A strategy is a plan of defining an objective. When you are given with a task, in this case, earning as much money as possible, you need to think about the strategy to earn that. What happens is, most people get distracted by the tactic, and you translate your question to how can I make most money to how do I use the 1,000 rupees in the best possible way. And as soon as you reframe the question, as how do I use this money, you lose sight of the strategy, and that's what happens. When you're implementing a policy, a national education policy, as soon as you're dealing with some tactical issues, some implementation issues, you get distracted by them and you lose sight of overall strategy. And that's a challenge in the policy implementation, that's a challenge in commercialization as well. Next, please. But let's talk about how this is a problem for commercialization. Next, please. Next slide. All right. The $10 bill, or the 1,000 rupees note in front of you does not mean that it's the best tool. Think about in your commercialization journey, what's that 1,000 rupees note or $10 bill that is distracting you? For a lot of people, it ends up being government grants. And you end up doing research so that you can get the next best grant. Not thinking about where it's applicable most, which industry will use it most, or where will it make the most impact. Can you ignore that and find your most valuable 3 minutes? Can you actually find out your biggest asset? For that, you'll need to look inside and thinking about how can you market your inventions the fastest. And as soon as you think about it, out of 1,000 rupees, 2 hours and 3 minutes, the best thing to sell is those 2 minutes. Next, please. So to conclude, this is what the $10 means to you. The $10 is actually for commercialization is your government grants often. Researchers, students, academicians, even school administrators focus on getting the best next government grant and government money that is touted as a success while it is far from it. the 2 hours that you have is your life of your invention. That could be patent life. That could be the time that the innovation is actually valuable before the next big thing comes. And you have to act fast. The 3-minute presentation is actually the not so perfect, the awkward kind of moment, when you're selling it. That's your awkward project that you're selling. So if you're commercializing something, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be, the ideal match for the problem that you're trying to solve, or the ideal product, or, something that will surpass or meet all the expectations of the industry. It will never be. So there's no point in waiting until you have that perfect product. Just start marketing it right now. Start trying to find a customer and start selling it right now. That's it from me today. I would like to leave you with these thoughts. Next slide. And I would like to leave this with this final quote from Michelangelo. The greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your patience as well. Thank you.